Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. I hope you and yours are fine. Great to have you back. I'm afraid to say I've still not got techies. I'm doing it, and I've already made one mess so far. You probably had a wee bit of delay getting in there. There was a big one before that where I forgot to hit the record button. So I apologise. And without any further ado, let me get in my guests today. Eva, welcome. How are you again?
I'm good, Roddy, and I'm looking forward to our greatest hits when you release the Prism Bloopers DVD.
Yeah, I'll feature most of them. And of course, I've got the old Coxbridge Cavalier. Where are you? Coxbridge or Brussels? And you're usually as bad as me now. You're on mute.
Aye, I hit the wrong button there. I was supposed to unmute and I missed it. So, c'est la vie, loving it. It's beautiful here, absolutely gorgeous sunny day in Brussels, and it's a fabulous city. I've got a friend, an old school friend, over visiting, so he's crashing out at the minute. A couple of beers last night, but I'll tell you what, I'm backing off it, Roddy. I'll probably have cause to celebrate later on today, but that's another story. Right. Let's just see.
Maybe no. We'll see. And there, up in the City of Discovery, it's Sir Alan. Alan, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, Roddy. Thank you very much for inviting me back again. Good to see you all. And we're just hoping that we don't have to pay the gas bill for the gaslighting this week.
Correct, Amundo. And my final guest is a newbie to the show, and it's Gordon Miller, and who some of you may already know. He's a member of Alba, a tax accountant, and he wrote a rather, I could say it's a damning critique of the Alba accounts and warning of trouble ahead. You've been rather maligned this week, Gordon, and been referred to as a dissident and an ex-member.
Yeah, I have. I'm not an ex-member yet, but you never know by the time this broadcast is finished. I may well be.
And you didn't do this out of malice?
No, I didn't. I wasn't going to do it at all. Somebody else asked me to look at the accounts, and when I looked at them, I thought, oh, these are actually not that good. But unlike most people seem to think they're not good because Alba made a small loss, but that's not the issue. The issue is the pattern of the decline, the difference between last year and this year, and that combined with the attitude of the leadership and the kind of the whole atmosphere in Alba just makes me think nobody is doing anything to fix this. And they are. It's not that Alba couldn't do what they say. I mean, they could get 15%. They could make a breakthrough in 26, but not by wishful thinking. Somebody actually has to sit down and look at this and, how are we going to do this? And that doesn't seem to be happening.
No. In fact, it was the classical of shoot the messenger.
It certainly was, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem we have, Eva, is all of our political parties, both sides of the border, do not want to face reality. There's the Alba party refusing to, look, they've lost so many of their activists, and they've lost their MPs, they've lost the income from Westminster, but no, everything's fine, don't you worry about it, everything will be fine. It's just absolute refusing to face the reality. But the biggest one was the Scottish National Party conference. Now, I've got to say, having looked at some pictures and a couple of clips that I've seen, the crowds at this, or the lack of people and bodies at this conference. We're not back in the 70s when we had Winnie Ewing in Brussels and we had Donald Stewart down in Westminster. We were getting 2 or 3 times the amount of people at conference, and it was vibrant and full of ideas and it was buzzing. But this looked flat. But the best of it was, and I need help with this, Eva, John Swinney came out with the conclusion that the reason they lost the general election so badly, and they've lost so many members and they've lost their way and their numbers keep plummeting down the way, is because they concentrated too much on independence and the process. I need that explained to me, Eva.
There's a lot in there, Roddy, but I'm particularly taken by Gordon's reference to trends and patterns, because if we look at trends and patterns within the independence movement, it becomes quite baffling. as you've rightly said, in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, SNP conferences were foot of the gunnels. Often there was standing room only. Yeah. And that was in the days when we had, as a movement and the SNP as a party, were still waiting for the big successes. We had obviously Dr. McIntyre originally, followed by Winnie Ewing, and then some great success in the 70s. But by the 80s and the 90s, it was evading and eluding us in numbers. And I say us because, like you and the others here, I was then a very active member of the SNP and very determined to see that that party succeeded. And every single member and supporter of the party supported independence. There was never a question of anything other than that. And what we understood was there was a process whereby the SNP would argue for how we would regain our independence. And in those days, the process was a simple one. A majority of MPs elected by the people from the SNP for Scotland and a majority of the popular vote would constitute the ability and the legal validity authorising us to negotiate our independence. The problem for now is that John Swinney and Hamza Yousaf before him and Nicola Sturgeon have signally failed to explain what the process for independence actually is. What they've done is narrate at length and sometimes ad nauseum in a fashion that can become particularly irritating what the benefits of independence are, without addressing the simple fact that there's no point in telling people how good independence is going to be for the country and for us as individuals if we don't have a means of achieving it. And that's John Swinney's error. And he's either done that by omission or he's done it deliberately. He has not given us a process for independence. Instead, what he has suggested, and others around him have confirmed, is that 2026 might become the time when we have to consider to vote SNP to get a constitutional convention. But what's very plain to see is that the SNP have run out of road. I think the numbers at the conference on Friday and Saturday were between 300 and 400. I know this because I watched a good part of it live and I watched a few votes, and there was a vote in particular on a remit back. And I counted the number of people who were in favour of the remit back and added up those who were opposed to the remit back. And the total between the two was something like 359. And at that time, watching online were about 163 people. So in the broadest of terms, an audience of the order of 500 or so. Let's pretend there were some folk out, perhaps at the stalls or in the bars. The numbers didn't approach 1,000. And that is a pitiful sight to behold. It is absolutely tragic and hugely unfortunate that the leadership of the party seem quite incapable of addressing what the rest of us know. The speeches in the main on Friday and Saturday were less than inspiring. They certainly would not have filled anybody watching it who was a neutral observer with any kind of confidence at all that they're a party going places, and simply confirmed to me that the activists need to take control of that party, and if they fail to do, then it's not going to survive. And if they thought the route this year was bad, 26 for Holyrood is going to be an absolute disaster for them.
Indeed. And as I said earlier, even we ginger dogs now admitting there'll not be a referendum. So when he's doing that, at least someone's seeing the light. Phil, when you heard this, that John Swinney was saying the reason they lost elections because they were too focused on independence in the process, what was your immediate thought?
You're a shameless liar, John. Eva summarised it well, the decline of the SNP. SNP have singularly failed to illustrate any cogent plan in the last 10 years to lead us to Indy. Since Alex handed over the reins to Nicola, there has not been a plan. We've seen no signs of hinted at it. But where's the plan that unifies the independence movement? And in spite of the fact in those 10 years, the numbers supporting independence are up to and over 50% of the population. They've had mandate after mandate, at least 6. And you think, Alex had one shot at the title when we were 28% in our numbers pro-Indy.
And 6 MPs.
And we got up to just over 51, 52, and UK panicked and threw the kitchen sink at us, and won a narrow victory. They thought the only reason they allowed us to have this referendum, which is the wrong way to do it. So we Ginger Dog and I agree. First time for a wee while that I've agreed with wee Ginger Dog. I don't want another referendum, but he's a mouthpiece of the SNP and not to be trusted in my view. So quite frankly, I don't really care what he says. He needs to get his act together again and remember what matters, serving the people of this country, the people who live and work in this country. And the reality that John, the picture he paints, I mean, the SNP, as Eva alluded to, lost dozens of MPs in July. And that was after an 18-month period of absolute turmoil. 3 different leaders. Police investigations into party finances. I mean, since the traitorous Nicola and her cabal, that includes John Swinney, came into the leadership role at the SNP 10 years ago, our policies have been driven in the opposite direction from that which would lead us to independence. They have barely mentioned the word. So, John, no, you're lying. You've concentrated too much on the independence process. Show me it. Show me where it featured high in a manifesto, or where it was heavily campaigned for, or where you have set out a roadmap to take us there. It hasn't been done, John. You're a liar. Instead, these shysters have implemented these policies that are designed to split the independence movement. The SNP policies under Nicola are designed by the establishment, as the establishment have Nicola and the rest of these grifters in their pocket. And the answer is to get rid of all these grifters, unify and get back on the road to independence for a people, for the independence for the people that live and work in Scotland and our nation. And fresh just in, the Daily Express, not a newspaper I read, I don't really read the newspapers, but an article by Lucy Sarrett gleefully reports that the SNP is reeling from a fresh scandal as police launch a new investigation connected to the Alex Salmond investigation. And it's see when you look at about it, Broadcroft, the operation, that misconduct, see when that comes out, see when that eventually comes out, that truth, that is what I believe will eventually clear out the Aegean stables, enable us to get rid of what's happening in the SNP right now and get rid of those who have betrayed us. Because I said it right at the beginning, we need something monumental and something evidential to show the level of how much of a traitorous act has been carried out. It's horrific. I mean, to try to do that to someone, to put someone in prison on false allegations, there has to be justice here. And until that happens, I genuinely think there's nothing will shift these people. You saw what they've done. Nicola, the rest of them have destroyed the SNP, and that will continue until such time as they get removed. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. Gordon, like as the rest of us on here, you were also in the SNP for many years in the London branch. What did you make when you heard John Swinney saying that the reason that they're losing popularity is because they're too focused on independence?
Well, I mean, it's complete nonsense. But living in London, it's actually very familiar. A lot of the reason that they have got away with this is that for years, they've essentially been in collaboration with the UK establishment. You get Nicola Sturgeon would say, I'm focused on independence, and you'd get articles in the Times and the Telegraph kind of pretending to believe her, and nothing was actually happening, but between them they were making it sound as if there was something which wasn't. And there are still people down here. I mean, my political friends are kind of split between the people I know in Scotland and the people I know here who are interested in politics. And people down here still have this very weird idea of the SNP. They would go along, if you ask them, they would go along with this idea that the SNP has failed in government because they have spent far too long pushing it in, they put too much effort into independence. even though it's nonsense. But like I said, it just seems to me that for the last 10 years, the SNP establishment has been pretty much hand in glove with the UK establishment, and everybody's pretending that independence is happening when of course it isn't.
No, I mean, the other thing I would say, if you look at the conference this week, and I can only go from what the small bits I've looked at, but where was all the carpetbaggers, or as they call them, ex-MPs, who made a great living from 2015 onwards? Where were they? Where was Sturgeon? Didn't see her. Didn't see any pictures of her or John Nicholson or a lot of the others. I don't know if they were there or not, but they should have been up telling us what they thought. Alan, you're another long-time SNP man. When you heard this nonsense, I don't put words in your mouth here, but you heard this from John Swinney, the leader of the SNP, that we'd focused too much upon independence. Here's the thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we had at one point, it was going to be, back in 2020, we were going to get a referendum because of Brexit, because Brexit was going to go through in 2020. And then she told us no constitutional convention. That's the way we're going to do it. It didn't happen. Then we were told again there were one more vote and we'll get another Section 30. And then she was going to the Supreme Court. And when Humsey came in, 1 minute he was going for Section 30. Next minute it was going to be the most amount of MPs. And then it was going to be most MPs but with 51%. And then it was going to be most MPs but under 50%. And then that changed to Section 30 again. John Swinney came in and said, hee-haw. What was the process? Where was the too much process he's talking about, Alan?
The only independence the SNP have been pushing is their independence from the Yes movement, because they've distanced themselves so far away from this movement that they don't have a clue what they're doing. But we want to have a real look at why the SNP. Now, in 2015, the SNP jumped on the ship called Destiny. At the last election, they went down like the Titanic, and their conference looked like the Mary Celeste. That's not because they were pushing independence. That's because they were pushing woke trans ideology.
Yeah.
They were bringing in bad legislation such as the hate crime bill, and they were not concentrating on independence. That's where the big problem is. And now, I mean, you mentioned all these other promises that we were getting from the SNP, from Sturgeon, Humsey, and now Swinney. They were all carrots that were being dangled at election times. And now even this convention that they're promising, it's after the election. It's not a convention of, it's not a constitutional convention. It's a convention of carrots yet again. It's time that people woke up, because the SNP are not going to get us over the line for independence. The people have to start mobilising themselves, not relying on any political party or any individuals. No one else is going to get us independence except for the people. And we must mobilise the movement again.
Yeah, absolutely. You're 100% right. I agree with you. And hopefully we'll maybe get onto that, because I think we need to do something about it ourselves. But on that, Eva, you've been a big promoter, as I have, of the Constitutional Convention. I remember the 31st of January 2020, when Nicola Sturgeon stood up and promised us a Constitutional Convention. But they wanted the Constitutional Convention we've been promoting before that and since that has been not what the SNP have said, all elected politicians. In other words, we're not going to let Alex Salmond in. We're not going to let Kenny McCaskill in. We're not going to let Neil Hanvey in. We're not going to let Colette Walker in. But it should be a constitutional convention of all interested parties, all political parties, Civil Scotland, the trade unions, councillors, COSLA, everyone should be involved in this, and we should come up with a strategy for 2026. Not, if you vote for us, we'll have one after we get our arse felt in 2026.
What we need to look at here is what the country actually needs and what the movement demands. And if you landed in Scotland from outer space and you were told to create a body of people that could make progress with the independence cause, then you would start with those with knowledge and experience and strategies and vision. What you would not do is fall into the trap of inviting those who have been responsible in the course of the last 10 years or so for failing the cause, failing the movement, and delivering government of Scotland, which has at times been, to be polite about it, less than competent. But the point about a convention is that if you set it up properly and you use the people who've got gumption and ability and a presence, and who can actually articulate not just the cause of independence, but can throw about ideas about how do we get there, who can talk about the sovereignty of the people of Scotland, who know our history, who also know our geography and know that there are some parts of the country crying out for independence and the freedoms that it brings economically, then what you would do is you would succeed in being the rake and cellar of the movement. You would create that field of dreams because you would be saying, build it and they will come. Because if the convention is run and operated by people who have the ability, but are also prepared to listen to the general public and take advice and information from grassroots, then you'll create a body which has the confidence of the people, but it won't just have the confidence of those who are already persuaded to the cause. It will attract the confidence of those yet to be persuaded. And that's what's needed: passion and knowledge and understanding and a vision for the kind of Scotland that we will be when we are independent. But we need to do that now. It cannot wait until 2026 for the reasons that we've already stated. So it needs a body of people to get together that folk have confidence in, and it also requires the hatchets to stop being buried either between each other's shoulder blades or in some cases from the front. So there are those bad faith actors within or in the fringes of our movement who ought not to be part of the convention, because the general public, but especially grassroots in the know, need to trust those who they entrust with the future destiny of our country.
Yeah, it goes back to actually the conversation I had at the beginning with Gordon. When people who are highlighting the problems and saying there's a solution are getting called dissidents and, you know, making trouble on Twitter, it doesn't help. You're shooting the messengers. We're trying to tell you we want independence. We're trying to show you the way to do it. We're trying to help. This, oh, we can't be told we know everything attitude has to stop. But Phil, when you heard that, you, like the rest of us on this show, have been a great supporter of we need a constitutional convention. But when you heard it was the conditions that they were putting on it after you elect us in 26, did you not think, oh, here we go again?
Absolutely, because that's exactly the truth. And let's not forget, and we'll, again, Eva, set it all out. We need the expertise, people with the will. No qualifying criteria. You do not impose. You do not get. I mean, you do not get to impose who has the right to fight for the future of their people and their country. Remember the Wokarati in the SNP. You have to agree with the SNP youth before you will be allowed to take part in this initiative that we've got. No, none of that. There's no pre-qualifier required here. We know what works. We saw it. We were part of an incredible. Credit ought to be given for the Yes movement and what it achieved. It's a very simple idea, and God knows, in spite of all the differences, in spite of all the different tribes that unified and different outlooks, they all saw the benefit of taking your own future in your own hands and determining the direction and the identity of your own nation and your own people, and looking after yourself. You put your own house in order, and you know to do that you've got to live in your neighbours. That community feel that we had, that we all are of a certain age, that we grew up where doors weren't locked when you were wee, you know. It matters. It actually matters. That trust is a real thing. It's not some concept. It's not some it's something that you actually need. You need to understand that you don't get to dictate to people what they think and how they behave. I mean, it's a broad church. That's what was wonderful about the Yes movement, and that's what's needed again. So no, you can't have someone telling you what to think, and the SNP are not to be trusted. The current SNP, one of the big critiques I would have about what we've been doing and what a lot of other commentators have been doing is to say this is what you need to do. flashy eyelids or whatever. This is what you need to do, Nicola. This is what you need to do, John. They're not going to do it. And it's not about the snake and the head of the snake on there. They just change it. They just keep changing it. Short-seated leadership of a flawed party that has been railroaded and has gone down the wrong track. We need to get the unification together. It needs to work. And this is where cat herders should be paid a massive amount of money. We need to get cat herders, and we need to understand, the diplomacy. That's what we need, not politicians, diplomats, people who understand how to get people working together, and you walk on treadshells. You tread on shells. I've eggshells. I've came across quite a few politicians. Genci Mukaj from Albania, superb, and he articulated very well in probably third language the difference between a politician and a diplomat, and I won't attempt to recount that here, but it's striking. And it is the ability, you go and you talk to somebody, you come out of the room, think you've got a good deal, and you've just compromised on pretty much everything you ever believed in, but you still get what you want. You still get, they reduce it to the prime directive, and we've all touched on that. That prime directive was, is, and should always be independence, nothing less.
Independence, nothing less. We all remember that from my era. It was probably the best strapline we ever had or ever will have. Gordon, another thing, because we should move into this, waiting till after 2026 to maybe get a constitutional convention, which incidentally could be next week. It could be fixed up and started next week. It really isn't difficult to get it going. But this week down in London, Kemi Badenoch, one of the forefront, I believe, to become the leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party, or the Business Party, blue side, as I prefer to call them. She's saying we need to roll back devolution. And we know what that means. So we haven't got the time to wait till after 2026, in my humble opinion. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I saw that. I don't think she's going to be the leader, but that doesn't really matter. What she's saying is what the rest of them think. I think a big problem that we have is that people are so used to the kind of the party system, and this is sadly not just confined to the SNP. The people running the party system, if they have somebody with competence, knowledge, ability, is not seen as an asset. They tend to be seen as a threat. So you never get to actually put your ideas forward. And they also, having a constitutional convention, it kicks the ball down the road, and it means they don't have to do the actual hard work. I mean, there's a lot of very unglamorous hard work needs to be done on policy. And I mean, there are things like, say financial regulation, something that's close to my heart. Nobody will ever come up to you and say, I wasn't sure about independence, but now that you've published your financial regulation proposals, yeah, I'm going to vote yes. That will never happen. But if you're in the middle of an independence campaign and a journalist says the banks and the financial sector in London distort the UK economy, they take money out the country, they increase inequality. Now in Edinburgh, you have the second largest financial centre in the UK. What are you going to do to regulate that? And you don't have some sort of answer, you'll just look stupid. And we don't do the kind of work that we need to anticipate and answer these questions.
No, I agree. Absolutely 100%. That's why we need to get moving now, Alan. You're right. Somebody, I think it was Philip said it, we will be the change. We will be the change. We have to be the change. The people need to be the change. What do you make about this wait until 2026 for a constitutional convention, Alan?
No, I mean, Karen Kenyon Wright didn't wait for the Labour government to get elected before he started campaigning for through the Scottish Constitutional Convention to get the devolution that will go. You've got to build up the information and the work before any election, so as people know what they're going to be getting, rather than these carrots being dangled time and time again. And what we should also be doing is looking at the past, because we're coming up to 10 years from the devolution, from the referendum.
Yeah.
Now, some of the mistakes that were made in the past were relying heavily on one party. I mean, when they produced the white paper, some people thought it was good, other people didn't think it was good. If that had been done through a constitutional convention with the entire Yes movement, we'd have got an agreed policy put in place. The government at that stage brought in or tried to push through legislation for a named person, very unpopular, and centralising the police department. Two unpopular things that should have been left until after the election, because that put a lot of people off voting. So these things are run by political parties because they've got their own vested interest. But if we could get the Constitutional Convention up and running early, before any elections, then it'll be the people's agenda that is at the election. And the Constitutional Convention can act immediately after that election has taken place and we have a majority. Because that's only where we are going to get a majority. If the people get together first, before the election, in a Constitutional Convention, so it is their agenda that we are following and not the party political agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. And if the politicians won't do it, we have to do it either. That's just a fact. And I'd like you to answer that. But also, because I just want to keep on the theme, what we've called this week's podcast is Now Do You See It? You want people to understand that they've been gaslit all the time. And another one of these people who refused to see, during the SNP conference, Neil Gray, the health secretary, on talking about the drug deaths, which are atrocious in Scotland above everything else. Now, I understand overall drug policy is down in London, but we have a lot of levers in Scotland that can be used. But he blamed the addicts. Just as John was blaming almost the voters, he was blaming the addicts for their own addiction, not the lack of help with them. It was, again, gaslighting. Again, it was shifting responsibility and refusing to face the reality and admit mistakes.
I watched that debate and I was horrified at some of the remarks that were made by people who, quite frankly, do know better. It's one of the reasons why, when we have a constitutional convention, I'm hopeful that Anne-Marie Ward will be a significant member of that. That said, it was abundantly clear in that particular debate that the emphasis for the SNP is still on harm reduction and on diverting attention to Westminster and attributing blame to Westminster. And where that took me, whilst I was watching that debate and bearing in mind some of the earlier speeches, I got to thinking, what would I do if I was in charge? And I reminded myself that for just over a year, under Hamza Yousaf's tenure, we had a minister, a cabinet minister, a cabinet secretary for independence. That was Jamie Hepburn. I actually genuinely don't know what he did over that period other than to A, collect an enhanced salary, and B, now and again launch a paper which took us absolutely nowhere on the route to independence. But I'm thinking that if John Swinney is determined actually to do something cogent about independence, then he actually needs to think now about appointing a minister or a spokesperson or someone with responsibility for the independence campaign. It's the raison d'etre of his party, and the absence of somebody with that remit on its own poses to me a number of questions. But in the terms of the bigger picture of what's been happening at the SNP conference, I also listened to Shona Robson, who spoke at length about the difficulties within her budgetary constraints, etc., because we know there are cuts coming. But she said that it was incumbent on all SNP members and supporters to remind people every day of all the good things that the SNP government had managed to achieve. And what her speech and those of many others had in common was, and this included, I think, Colette Stevenson and some others who spoke about poverty and inequality, I thought they'd been watching Prism, because they kept talking about the baby box, and I could see Yvonne Ridley's face in front of me when it was mentioned, because it was mentioned by just about everybody. The baby box, the Scottish Child Payment, I think Neil Gray and several others referred to lifting 100,000 children out of poverty. And if they said it once, they said it half a dozen times. The record has stuck. What has got to happen is that the SNP must realise they cannot rest on Alex Salmond's laurels. Now, I mention Alec deliberately because, as Alan said, we're coming up to the 10th anniversary of the referendum. Hopefully the only independence referendum that Scotland will ever have, because we'll achieve our independence by a different method. But we're going to have the Hope Over Fear event in Freedom or George Square in Glasgow during the day. And at night, Alec has an event in Glasgow, which is in respect of the 10-year anniversary of the referendum. And the people who are included in Alec's event are Alec Neil, Joanna Cherry, Philippa Whitford, Bernard Ponsonby. Now, I hope with all my heart that that event is not simply reminiscing on what we nearly did 10 years ago or what's happened since, but I hope that event includes plans and proposals for how we get from here to attaining our independence by the shortest, quickest route possible. That's what the people need to hear.
Absolutely right. That's exactly. I worry and think you're right that they'll reminisce and pat each other on the back and say what a wonderful job they did. There is no visionaries about these days, it seems. None. And I mean, we keep hearing, as I say, from the Alba party, we have a plan. Okay, what is it? Come on, tell us. What is it? Because, we will negotiate, will we? We need a constitutional convention. We need to get our act together. We need to be able to move forward. But I want to, because the clock is already ticking on, and staying in this theme of gaslighting and and cheating the people. So the Labour Party have come up with a new whiz by themselves on everything that is the fault of the SNP. This is when Anas Sarwar saying the cuts in Scotland are not related to the UK government cuts. No, really? What? You don't know how the Barnett formula works. You don't understand that the budget is set by London. You think we're daft. Actually, you do, don't you, Anas? Anas thinks we're daft. But they've started switching the blame away from themselves. They're trying to hide, this is we were too focused on independence. They're saying, well, in Scotland, it's the SNP's fault. In England, it was the Tories' fault. And in Wales, don't say anything about Wales. Let's keep Wales out of it. We'll blame Westminster for Wales. It's the old, they won't face reality. They won't turn around and say, actually, it's neoliberalism that's caused this. And we're the same. Of course, they wouldn't say that. They should, but that's the reality. We just voted another Tory business party in.
We did, and we saw it coming. We've been predicting this for some time. And sadly, it's the deconstruction of democracy is what we're witnessing in front of our very eyes. We used to have a choice. I would revert everyone to George Carlin, as I often do. His classic piece, 4.5 minutes on YouTube, The American Dream. It's called The American Dream because you got to be asleep to believe it. And it is a con, and we're falling into exactly the same place. It's exactly the same situation. We're being duped and told you have a choice. You don't have a choice. It's just the two different cheeks of the same backside, as we've often said. Yeah, this is reported extensively, that cuts in Scotland are not related to cuts made by the UK government. Barnett formula, as you quite rightly say. And people need to understand what Scottish Labour leader and Scottish Labour leader, he's the Labour Party of Britain, based in England. What he's saying, this live from him, is he's saying funds are obviously it's not down to Britain, and it's an utter lie. It's complete nonsense, because we all know, if you do even a little bit of research, folks, you will see that the funds paid into Scotland are constantly in decline in real terms. Costs go up, funding goes down. What happens? This applies to households. It's far more complex than that, as Margaret Thatcher got away with that when she once said, oh, it's like running a house. An economy is completely different, but that's quite another story. But one thing that should be obvious, and Anas Sarwar is lying here, there's lots of them about, and most of them seem to be in politics, but I saw a brilliant meme about this, and about the 22 billion black hole that was talked about, that we're supposed to, the Labour didn't know about, but the SNP are supposed to know, and it was excellent. It really summarised it and put it in simple terms. Scotland, you've got your house and it's £10. Our neighbour England takes the £10, gives us £4 back. Then it tells us it's bought a lawnmower for use for both of us, and we now owe them £20, but we don't have a garden. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. That's it. I mean, there's some really, really good stuff being done on GERS and the con that it is that Ling put into place. And accountants like Gordon are exactly the kind of people we should, and Murphy, Mr. Murphy as well, who wrote some excellent critiques on GERS. That's who we should be listening to. But the tragedy here is most people, as Gordon has pointed out earlier, are not really set on fire by the prospect of reading through a country's accounts. It just doesn't cut it. It's not going to rally the flag armies to fight the wars of revolution, but it should.
But no, but the soundbite gets them,
con.
they go, well, we can't afford the independence. Because
and that's where it comes in. That's where it comes in, and that's where, a lot of critique was put down on the fact that we didn't prove the currency issue when we wrote Scotland's Future way back for the 2014 referendum. But it has its place, and just as Wings Over Scotland has proven time and time again, evidentially based facts and objective reporting count, because it resonates with people when you get them in the crosshairs, and you can actually pin them down and make them answer questions. Yeah.
Here's the thing, Gordon. The Chancellor was up and sat in front of the STV to explain, the SNP are every bit as guilty. Now, I'm no great lover of the SNP, as we all know. But the SNP, I've got to defend them in this one. She said, the SNP have been overspending, and this is why, there's a 22 billion budget, except blah, 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 black hole. And she got away with it because the journalist didn't jump in and go, wait a minute, and maybe you can help me here, because if you're on a fixed budget, which we are, you're only allowed to, the Scottish Government's only allowed to borrow 450 million a year for infrastructure projects that are approved by Westminster, not ones that they have, but Westminster's got to approve up to a maximum in eternity of 3 billion, where we're nowhere near. It is, as an accountant, explain to me how you can get to 22 billion a year of debt when you can only borrow 450 million, which you don't necessarily borrow every year. I'm lost.
Yeah, well, you're lost because it's impossible.
Yes.
But a big problem I think we have is the kind of people who are Scottish, not just Scottish, but the kind of people who are Scottish politicians. This sort of thing is easily attacked on a factual basis. Richard Murphy is great, but nobody pushes this. And one of the reasons one of the most disappointing things of my life was when I was in London, in the London branch. We used to have a couple of meetings a year in the Houses of Parliament, and MPs would come along. And if you tried to talk to them about GERS, they didn't want to know. They were. It was like they were scared of numbers. None of them have any kind of accounting or even business background, and because they don't understand it, they don't want to talk about it, and so there has never been what there should have been over the last sort of 10 years, really, of pushing the facts, of explaining why GERS is nonsense, of coming up with. I mean, it's not that there are no alternative figures; there are lots. But I can't remember which one it was. But when I put this to one of our MPs in London, it was, oh no, we can't do that. We'd be accused of fiddling the figures. And if you start from that position, I mean, what hope have you got?
Yeah, exactly. There's no hope. Folks, I don't know if you hear it, one of my neighbours has decided to start using a bloody Kango hammer to take down a wall or something. The dog's not barking, but we've got a Kango hammer going. I hope it's not disturbing you too much. Another thing that happened this week, as I say, while Rachel Reeves and every Labour elected MP talking about how bad mismanagement of the economy by the SNP, blah. This article appeared, and I don't know if you saw it. Where is it? I've got to find it here. Here we are, Alan. This woman who has managed to convince Rachel Reeves that the way forward is not public investment, but private finance investment into public services. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, is that not PFI? Have they learned nothing?
They have learned absolutely nothing. I mean, the reason this country is in so much problems of public sector funding is because we're still paying off the hospitals and the schools that the Labour Party built the last time using private finance money. And once that's all paid off, after paying more than double what it's worth, not one of these buildings will belong to us. That's what that means. It's putting public money in to help their private, their friends. I mean, obviously, they can't give them lordships and everything now because they've been caught out on that one. So they're now just giving them little contracts here and there. But I mean, the Labour Party always start with the biggest lie when they come to Scotland by saying, Anis Sarwar, the leader of Scottish Labour. There is no such thing as Scottish Labour. And it's Anis by name, Anus by nature. I mean, this is a man who is claiming that under devolution with cut budgets, we can increase spending. But when we've got macroeconomic policies of an independent Scotland, we can't do anything. I mean, the man is a nutter. He has no idea of the powers of the Scottish Parliament. I mean, remember when he first became the leader in Scotland, he would ask the questions of the First Minister about employment law and why they're not changing employment law. That is something that the Smith Commission tried to devolve to Scotland, but the Labour Party opposed it. And they stopped that power coming to Scotland. Yet he demands that the SNP do something about it. I mean, the man is just a nutcase.
Now I've got one cutting down a tree. Fabulous. On that, Sarwar said, oh yes, their financial mismanagement is terrible, Eva. They should have known the 22 billion cut was coming. Well, they didn't. The Labour Party told us they didn't know. And yet we found out from the Office of, the Office of Budget Responsibility, the Labour Party knew before they put out their fully costed manifesto for the election. They already knew there was a £22 billion hole, which they're now trying to blame on the SNP and the Tories, and they'll continue to do that. But they knew. They lied. The one thing the Labour Party are consistent about is lying, and hopefully, and they do, they get away with it, don't they? They knew.
Well, of course they knew, but the issue here is really that before the election and since, Labour have consistently confirmed that they've no intention of raising taxes on those who are best able to pay. So I watched this, I think it was this morning, Lucy Powell, and earlier in the week Rachel Reeves talking about how they would not be raising income tax levels, they wouldn't be raising national insurance, they wouldn't be raising VAT. And I'm sitting thinking, well, if they're not going to be drawing in more money, then they've got to cut the amount of money that's being paid out. But who's actually suffering? And the people that are suffering and are likely to suffer the most are those who are the most needy. We've covered already the winter fuel payments. We have concerns about the NHS. We're worried about the Barnett formula and the impact that changes have there. And what there's absolutely no getting away from is that Labour now deserve the name Red Tories because that's all they are. And the reason why they're Red Tories is that they have to continue to attract what they consider to be that bit of the vote in the red wall that they need to keep themselves in power. They don't need Scottish seats, but the Scots voted Labour in the main, not because they particularly wanted a Labour government, but as we said before, they wanted the Tories out. And the SNP gave them the ideal opportunity by confirming that they would do deals with Labour where Labour in power. And the result of that we've seen is that coupled with that and SNP incompetence, they lost, as Phil said, dozens and dozens of seats. And Scotland's independence movement remains in jeopardy, and we're all worried about what the future holds because, lo and behold, Labour are turning out not to be every bit as bad as all of us here predicted. They're fully worse. Who knows where it's all going to end? They're paying billions, as you've covered often, Roddy, for the war in Ukraine. And it's abundantly clear that they are prioritising warmongering over the needs of the people of the United Kingdom. That of that there can be no doubt. And it's such a sad day to see a party founded on principles including peace and nuclear disarmament and home rule conducting themselves in the way that they are. We need hardly mention abolition of the House of Lords, because folk like George Fulk seem to have forgotten that that was one of the primary aims of the party. So with Labour, as with the Tories, the rich get rich, and what do the poor get other than poorer? That's where we are.
Yeah, but here's the great thing, Phil. Oh, that's a wrong one, I beg your pardon. Yeah, that's it. Anna Sarwar said the people will find Keir Starmer's warning of painful in his first budget quite refreshing. The poor will find it refreshing. What do you mean? Because it's all the SNP fault, but do you think the poor will be finding it refreshing that they're going to get more pain, Phil? You're on mute, mate.
Yeah, there's a bit of noise here as well, so I was trying to cut it out. No, utter nonsense. Obviously, he's trying to deflect again. You know that by being honest about the pain that's coming down the road, somehow this is sympathetic or empathetic. No, it's pain. It's unnecessary pain. It's continuation, as has been cited before, of austerity policy, and there is no need for it. Our governments, the truth is, the elected government, our representatives, are spending the wealth of this union of unequals in a corrupt manner. You know, and going back to what Rachel Reeves and PFI, I know a wee bit about PFI. Alan and Eve are correct, because it's funding of public buildings now to be built and paid, but you pay actually much more than you should later on. That's all it is. It's cooking the books. I was involved in PPP in the States for a flood prevention system that taxed the locals in state law and a wee bit of federal investment for over $3 billion. And you know, you look back at the history of what this is. Just look at the detail. The first, I think it was one of the first PFI projects in Britain. It was, I think it was Liverpool, HM Prison Wolds, and I think it opened in the early 90s. And you know, since then, the role of the private sector in running prisons alone has steadily grown, never mind any other public investment in PFI project. Now, that's since come back into the public sector, but you know, I remember at the time, it was put into place because the Liverpool Council didn't have the money to fund and build a prison that they desperately needed. So they got PFI in. It was paid off in the first couple of few years of renting it back to the council. And the people of that county paid 3 or 4, I can't remember, it was substantially more than they had to for a prison, had the government been managed properly and responsibly, had the books been balanced, had they had proper accountancy, had they not been conning the people. So understand this, PFI is a con, and more of this will result in exactly the same thing. It's a way for the government to build resources and facilities now and pay for it later, but you pay for it later. And because of the nature of the politics in 4-year cycles or 5-year cycles in the UK, it's someone else that ends up carrying and footing the bill. But the ultimate payer of these bills are, of course, the people. So a con, we should avoid it.
Absolutely. Gaslighting is what the theme of this is, ladies and gentlemen. You've been gaslit by the SNP telling us it was because we like independence that we lost the election. Bollocks. You're getting told that all the financial problems in Scotland and the lack of everything that you need is because of the SNP overspending on a fixed budget that you can't overspend on. You have to balance it. It's a load of nonsense. But here's a classic example, because they're corrupt media join in. Look at these 2 different headlines about the same topic. One headline's in England, one's in Scotland. The pensioners' energy bill, SNP cut. Down in London, they're blaming the Labour Party alone. But when they come to Scotland, the Scottish Daily Mail are also blaming the SNP, saying it's their fault. That's the kind of gaslighting we get. Help me out, Gordon, on this economy. You're the economist. You're our bean counter here. At the end of the Second World War, the UK was not only skint, it was bankrupt. We were up to our neck in debt and everything else, but we still managed to bring in a welfare system. We brought in an NHS. We built I don't know, millions of council houses. We started building roads and infrastructure again. Why now? Why now when they keep telling you, oh, the 6th largest economy in the world? Why don't, if I'm not wrong, fiat currency, just print some more money and borrow it and build and invest in infrastructure and jobs and everything else? Am I right?
Yeah, you've been reading Richard Murphy, haven't you?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. But I don't know. I think this is the accumulation of something that has been going on probably since the 70s. When I joined what was then the Inland Revenue, there was everybody agreed that the civil service and business should be completely separate. They agreed that finance, also the civil service should be professional. And ever since then, I mean, Margaret Thatcher started this, but I don't think even she would have got us to where we are now. Everything has been chipped away. Instead of seeing these things that made the country work as an asset, suddenly they're a cost. And things should be centralised and costs cut. And the tax offices, for example, used to be everywhere. And they would look not just at big things, but they would look at the local economy. And people could go and actually talk to someone if they had a problem. Now, there's this, not only is it not separate, there's this kind of revolving door between business and government. And as soon as the professional, the accountants, the advisors get their feet under the table, everything is biased towards benefiting business and not towards actually running a country for the benefit of the people who live here. And that has gone on so long now. I mean, when I was in the tax office, I was the management inspector for an Aberdeen district. One of the things you lived or died on was over 14-day post. If you had something that had come in and you hadn't dealt with it within 14 days, you were in big trouble. Now, nobody expects to get any sort of response for months. You phone them up and you will be half an hour, 3/4 of an hour on the phone, and people they've just come to it because everything's got shittier over years and years. People just accept it, and there's absolutely no reason we couldn't be doing all the things that you said. There's no reason that we couldn't be running the country the same way as we did in the 40s and 50s. But you have to change the mindset of people. You'd have to. It's very difficult if things happen very, very slowly, which this has done over years and years and years, to get people suddenly outraged about it. It was like Brexit. There was never any big thing in Brexit where suddenly one day everything was worse than it was yesterday. It all just happened slowly. And this is something that bothers me. I don't quite see how we kind of reset the kind of zeitgeist, if public administration can have a zeitgeist on this, so that you have some kind of mass movement against it.
Yeah, I mean, they'll try and do everything in their power to stop that happening. They don't. That's why they're trying to censor things like Twitter or X, if you prefer, ladies and gentlemen, and why they want to control the message. But here's it, going back to when the Tory party was still in power and the Labour Party weren't. Here's our Annis, Alan, you'll love this, how he's changed his tune. This goes back, ladies and gentlemen, understand you're being gaslit every single day.
Energy prices increase. We need to take urgent action right now too. In Scotland, 150,000 pensioners live in poverty. The Scottish Parliament has the power to increase winter fuel payments for those pensioners. But what has the SNP chose to do? They've chosen to hand that power back to a Tory government. We should keep that power in Scotland and increase the winter fuel payments by £70 to the lowest income pensioners to help them in the winter months. Because that's the difference. Because that's the difference between us and the SNP. Where they obsess over mandates and white papers, we want to use the powers of the Scottish Parliament to end the choice between heating and eating this winter.
There he is, trying to shift the blame for the government removing the winter fuel payment and saying we should increase it by 70. You know, mitigate our mistakes. Again, gaslighting and being dishonest with the people. That's the Labour Party.
It's the Labour Party through and through. I mean, technically he's right. They have the power on paper. But without the finances to back that power up, you are powerless. And what exactly does he want to cut and instead for to get that £70 extra onto the winter fuel payments? I mean, that's the thing that Labour never ever come up with. It's always, yeah, you're bad. You should be doing this, should be doing that. But they don't tell you where the money should come from. They're the ones that's cutting this money, and they always do it. But then Labour, I mean, the difference between Labour in 1945 and what they are now is 1945, they created more wealth for the ordinary people. They got people into jobs, building houses, involved with the NHS, making the country a healthier place. But now they're putting more money into the pockets of those who do not spend it. Either goes into a bank or goes away to the Cayman Island. When you give the poorer money, that gets spent within the local economies, and that builds up economies. It's like a cycle. You give money to them, they give it back to us, and it just goes on like a roller coaster. Give it to the rich, and it disappears out of society. It does no good to the economy at all. But Labour are continuously doing the same as what the Tories are doing. I mean, we are a one-party state, just with a lot of different branches.
Correct. Yeah, I call it the Business and Wealth Party, red side, blue side, and we've now got the red side in just now. But no, I would say the difference in 1945 was, going to use a word that will probably be banned soon, the Labour Party was, wait for it folks, socialist. That was the difference. They were socialist and did socialist policies. But socialism's the evil, capitalism's great, they tell you. Eva, what another thing, the other things about, should I just say before I go to you, Eva, to get the winter fuel payment pension credit, pensioners are oldest people with, cognitive problems, with eyesight problems, all sorts of things, have to fill in a 220 questionnaire, 22 pages of 10 questions per page to get this paltry amount of money. Shame on you, Labour Party. Shame on you, Tory Party. You're disgusting doing that to pensioners. Being a pensioner myself, I don't need a heating allowance. I'm roasting here, by the way. But here, is it any surprise? There was as I say, without techie, I just used to be able to shout, put that up, and now I'm having to find these things myself. There was a survey this week that came out, Eva, where, and I hope I can find it because it's, there it is. It says the Labour Party, 62% of people in Scotland know that the Labour government doesn't understand Scotland. But the Labour Party are trying to tell you that they're the only people that can save you. But the Scottish people know that. And John Swinney's trying to tell us that, we need to convince more people. The people are convinced. They just need leading, Eva.
I think what's interesting, and sometimes we are guilty of losing sight of this, is that there are many people within the Labour Party and who have voted Labour who support independence for Scotland, just the same as there are within all the other parties. And I think that what's very telling this year particularly is that when we're in the midst of a cost of living crisis or a fuel crisis or whatever it is that you want to call it, we've got sound bites from politicians of every party explaining how they're going to address poverty and inequality throughout the UK, and especially obviously the part we're interested in, Scotland. But each party has exactly the same failing. They all have the same weak spot, which is instead of taking decisions which will actually target poverty and inequality by redistributing wealth, giving people hope and incentives, they all, and Labour are doing really well at this just now, they penalise the poorest and the most vulnerable. And the position in relation to that application form for pensioners is a prime example. Another one that is appalling, and you'll understand for obvious reasons it's close to my heart, is I have to apply every 3 years for a blue badge to park my car in a disabled space. There's no explanation for it other than you for a local authority. But does somebody think my leg's going to grow back on again? Because I feel like writing that in the application form every time I have to apply. But that is the kind of thing that happens when you're applying for any welfare benefit. They review your circumstances, and it's back to, as Gordon was kind of alluding to, computer says no. We've become, as a society, Scottish and throughout the United Kingdom, we've moved away from providing services that are tailor-made to the needs of the individual to having a one-size-fits-all. And what I think the Labour Party have not yet grasped is that Anna Sarwar's speech that you showed there about increasing the winter fuel payment is something that will resonate with most of the population of Scotland. Most folk in Scotland don't want to see that winter fuel payment lost. Survey after survey shows that there is antipathy in Scotland towards the two-child rape clause and the bedroom tax. But people are slowly beginning to understand that the Scottish Government, under devolution, cannot continue to mitigate these. And there will come a time when there's a tipping point, and I hope that's not far away, when we have people taking direct action and arguing vehemently with politicians who try to rewrite history. So I hope that somebody, some journalist, is going to challenge us on what it is that Labour's plans and motivation for Scotland and for Holyrood 26 actually are. Because at the moment, it's a scattergun approach. Nobody really knows what Labour have planned, except that they're trying to claw their feet from underneath the SNP government. This 150 million being made available to the Secretary of State for Scotland's office to then dole out to local authorities is exactly that. And it roughly equates to the amount of money lost in Scotland in respect to the winter fuel payment. So Labour are, in fact, robbing from Peter to pay Paul. And that's the kind of thing that they're going to continue to do if they're allowed to get away with it. This is where we need strong politicians standing up for Scotland who will actually put these facts and figures to Labour and demand answers. You know, the people of Scotland, I would say, are, with a small s, socialist in outlook, because even those in Scotland who are conservative still have a social conscience and understand that we have to spend money in a fashion that is not just economic but also humanitarian.
Yeah, that 150 million they're giving to the Secretary of State, or the Governor General, as I prefer to call him, to spend is not robbing Peter to pay Paul, it's robbing Peter to pay the Labour Party election machine, because that's what it is, it's electioneering, and it's absolutely pork belly politics. Last thing, the clock's beating us, and I'd like you, Phil, to have a look at this one. This is, ladies and gentlemen, I go back to the theme, you've been gaslit, you've been lied to all the time, don't fall for it. Here, pre-election, Mr. Starmer, wonderful.
The question is, I think you've got to build and turbocharge your economy rather than cut with austerity out of this. And there's a lot of thinking now that the old argument that you need to just balance the book as quickly as possible just isn't right anymore. But for heaven's sake, let's invest things, let's turbocharge the economy, and not make the mistake of the last 10 years, because I think it was a huge, huge mistake.
And yet, he's going to do exactly what we've done for the last 10 years, Phil.
Snake oil salesman. And say and do anything to get into power. Sadly, like most politicians, like most parties we've seen, and what saddens me is the demise of the independence movement parties and how that they seem to be adopting the same modus operandi, and it is not good enough. And, you know, on the last couple other, it's no surprise that 61% of all Scots say Labour government doesn't understand Scotland when they see things like this, when they see Starmer come out saying one thing and talking sense and more of of that which was the Labour Party that we all grew up with and most of us trusted, certainly me for most of my life. So it's not surprising that faith has been lost by the Scottish people when we look at what's patently observable from the last general election. And it's something, of course, we report in this programme. It wasn't, the Labour victory was not so much about the collapse of the Tories. It was more about the collapse of the Tories in England and the SNP in Scotland than anything Labour did. They pretty much stood still, which is an achievement and a wee bit of Kipling for you, to keep your head when all around are losing theirs. That was an achievement, and that they get a bit of credit for, but it was no great achievement. So, and looking at what we've just heard him say and what Eva was pointing on, just watch Labour deconstruct devolution. That gimmick that they pulled, this piece of electioneering to take the money from the incompetent SNP and we'll take it and we'll look after the poor. 150 million's a band-aid over a leg amputation. It's appalling. Sorry for that one, Eva, but that was really funny. You should put that on your next application. It's in my head now. I mean, it's so frustrating. Computer says no, but what enrages me and what should enrage us all, it sickens me actually. Yes, Labour have betrayed the working class. That's obvious. The apple has fallen very, very far from that tree since the days of the ragged-trousered philanthropist and the win for socialism and the people of Britain in the 40s and 50s. But what makes it worse for me is to allow this wretched party that the Red Tories are back into power through the SNP management's corruption and deliberate incompetence. That's what enrages me. And we need to do something about it. Get rid of those who have betrayed us and betrayed the independence movement and would thereby keep us on our knees.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our show. A couple of things before I go. I want to say that we've been talking among ourselves here in prison, and in the view that none of the politicians are going to do anything about the Constitutional Convention, we're going to start trying to do something about it. We're going to start phoning around. We're going to start trying to pull some people together. We're going to start doing something because others aren't. And we need to, not we, when I say we, I don't mean prison. I mean we, the Scottish people, need to take matters into our own hands. And I hope you'll join us in this journey. This is not for personal. None of us here have personal political ambitions or desires or anything else except for our country. And on that token, in 2 weeks' time, it is, of course, Hope Over Fear, their annual jamboree in George Square, Freedom Square. We will be there. The crew from prison will be there. We'll be there with our wee tent, or what do you call it? No, gazebo, probably need it, and survival suits and brollies and God knows what else. But we'll be there. I hope you'll be there. The more people that turn out, folks, the better. We've got to tell them, we're not lying down to this. We're not accepting this, and we're not taking your lies, your gaslighting anymore. We're fighting back. So till we see you and yours, take care.